Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly from St. John's Church in Detroit. We're continuing our series of daily morning meditations where we generally look at one or another lessons that are assigned for morning or evening prayer, what is known as the Daily Office Lectionary. I thought today let's take a look at the lessons assigned for morning prayer from St. Luke's Gospel. Now, if we remember Monday morning at morning prayer, we heard the story of St. Matthew from St. Matthew's Gospel about the rich young man who comes to Jesus and asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus' answer in Matthew's account for this particular fellow is that, how do you keep the commandments? And the man says, "I've kept all these from my youth up." And Jesus then prescribes to that individual that he should go and sell everything he has and come and follow me. Now, here's another story about a lawyer who stands up and he asks the same question. This is from Luke's Gospel. What should I do to inherit eternal life? So let's hear what St. Luke's account and this other fellow, his encounter with Jesus. Luke 10, beginning at verse 25. "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, 'Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' And he said unto him, 'What is written in the law? How readest thou?' And he answering said, 'Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself.' And he said unto him, 'Thou hast answered right. Do this, and thou shalt live.' But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?' And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was in the place, came and looked on him, and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. And he went up to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set on him his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave it to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Now which of these 3, thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go, and do thou likewise." Okay, now, unlike the story in Matthew's Gospel we read at morning prayer on Sunday, where the young man really genuinely wanted to know how he could have eternal life, and then, unfortunately, when Jesus gave him the prescription of what it was in his particular case that was preventing him from being the person that God needed him to be, which was that he was too attached to worldly riches, this particular fellow asked Jesus the same question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? To trick him, to try to kind of trick him up. He's a lawyer, and he answers in kind of a lawyerly way, doesn't he? Because he prescribes the law. Jesus said, how do you read it? And he gives him what's known as the summary of the law. He's absolutely right. And Jesus says, well, go and do this, and thou shalt live, right? Now, none of us can really keep the law completely, but obviously Jesus says that we must try to keep the law. We can only do it by grace, by the way, on this side of the cross and the empty grave. But for this fellow, it's impossible, right? You cannot keep all of the law. But the man still wants to trick up Jesus, and so he says, but then who's my neighbor, right? And the love my neighbor is a self part. Who's my neighbor? And of course, Jesus is not going to say just the people who live on either side of you, or only even those who are members of the original covenant, your fellow Jews. Because the Samaritan, who is the one who does the right thing, is not a Jew. He is not a member of the original covenant. Samaritans are heretics. And that's why this is such a scandalous story. The Good Samaritan is almost an oxymoron to the listeners of the story who are members of the original covenant. We think of Good Samaritan and Good Samaritan laws as something positive, and it is. But to hear Samaritan as the good guy in a story would have been like nails on a blackboard, right? For those of the original covenant, because the Samaritans have fallen away from the true faith. And in fact, Jesus has other encounters with the Samaritan woman where he has to correct her theologically. But Jesus says we should prove neighbor by showing mercy, right? And so what will be broken down is the wall, the dividing wall of this hostility between Jew and Gentile. All of us can be one in Jesus Christ, and even if we are not yet one, we can be merciful one to another. We need to prove to be neighborly in just that way. So today's Wednesday, right? And so we'll have our 12:15 Holy Communion service and our 4 o'clock evening prayer service. So I do hope you can join us for one or both of those, either in person or on this live stream where you're watching this meditation. And I hope that your Wednesday is a day that is full of blessings.